When Twitter was first built, the code which powered it was a lot more complicated than it is today. Using great tools like Firebase and React, we can build Twitter where you can sign in, post and view tweets, and build it in a scalable way. So it won't matter if you have 10 people or 1 million people using it, the code will be exactly the same. What we're going to build today is already live on the internet. It's a simple mobile web version of Twitter with a sign-in button using Google Authentication. You can see tweets from previous users, post tweets yourself by clicking the tweet button and writing your own tweets. And we're going to build this all in 20 minutes using Firebase and React. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, let me know in the comments, and subscribe. Alright, let's get started. So we're going to open up our terminal and we're going to type in npx create react app. We're going to call it Twitter app. And then once we're in our Twitter app directory, we need to install a few dependencies. So we're going to go yarn add react router DOM. And then we're also going to add our Firebase React hooks. We're also going to add in Node Sass, Bootstrap with Bootstrap and React. We're also going to add in a few fonts from Font Awesome. Once we've done all that, we can open up our project in our code. Then we're just going to go through and delete a few of the files because they're not needed. They are junk for the moment. Then we need to go and create a few folders, so assets, components, pages. Then we need to go to the browser and download the assets. And these are just going to include our SVGs and a few images. So once you've got the assets, just go and unzip it and copy it into the assets folder we created a second ago. And we should have 3 folders in there: icon, image, and the Sass folder. And in our components folder, we're going to go ahead and create our very first component, which is the loading component. So call it loading.js. Then we're going to need to import a few different libraries. So we're going to go ahead and import React. Then we need to include our Font Awesome icon and FA spinner. Make sure that those two are surrounded by squiggly brackets because inside the actual main library, they are sub-libraries. Then create our function and make sure you export the function as well. And we're going to return a div with a class name container and loading, with another div inside there with row, and then another div inside of that with col12. Then we're going to use the imported Font Awesome icon and we're going to give it an icon of FA spinner, and then we're going to make sure we add on the end there a nice spin. So the next thing we're going to do is create our first page. This is home.js. And like before, import our React library, and then we need to go ahead and create a home class, which extends our React component. And then inside of our class, we need our constructor and a render method. And then inside of that render method, we want to import the loading component we just created and show that by default for our home page. So when we're loading content, we will show the loading icon. And then we're going to go ahead and create our compose.js, which is our second page, and then copy everything we just created in the home.js and paste it in the compose.js. And then just rename it from home to compose. And the next 2 pages we're going to create is the login and logout pages. These will just be functions because we don't need to be loading any content for these. And like before, they always need to return something. Then go ahead and create our logout page. Copy what's in the login, paste it in the logout, and just rename everything. Now we're going to open up our index.js and we need to modify this. So first, let's go ahead and delete a few lines. And then we need to import from React router DOM 3 different libraries. We're going to include browser router, switch, and root. Then before we include the pages, just want to include our CSS from our assets that we downloaded from my site. Then we want to import the 4 different pages. So compose, duplicate that a few times. So we've got the 4, and then we need to modify it respectively: home, login, and logout. So down inside of our render section, where we're actually going to be rendering the React DOM, we need to have a div with a class name container-iPhone. Now this will pull from the assets that we downloaded, a nice iPhone image, which will surround our main project. Inside of here, we need to use the router component which we imported at the top, and we're going to use a switch to switch between the individual pages, and then a root to define each of the individual routes. And this is actually going to be your path within the browser. So when you type in www.twitter.com/compose, and then we need to output the compose component that we just imported. duplicate that a few times. So we've got the 4, and then we need to modify it respectively. Home needs to be the home page, so we're just going to put a / on that one. Then the login /login, and logout can be /logout. Something that's quite important, the home page needs to be the last one in the root because it's a default. Then we can go ahead and start it on our web browser, and then we need to go to localhost 3000, and we should see this, a nice iPhone, black screen, and a loading icon. And if we go ahead and open up our developer tools and put it on a responsive layout, you can see on a very small screen, it actually hides the mobile phone image. So on your real physical mobile phone, it's gonna just show the black screen with the loading icon. Now, before we go any further, we need to set up our Firebase project on firebase.com. So head over to Google and type in console.firebase.google.com. Here you'll land at Firebase, where you can create a project. Call the project whatever you like, but I'm going to call it Twitter clone. And I'm not going to enable Google Analytics, but if you want to, you can. So we need to go ahead and install our Firebase tools next. So it'll be an npm install -g for global Firebase tools. This will install it globally so it can be used anywhere, anytime. Then to use Firebase, first we need to do a Firebase login. This will redirect over to your browser to link the two. Make sure you allow it so the Firebase tools has access to your Google account, and then you're successfully logged in. Go back to your terminal and you're good to go. Next, make sure you're inside of your Twitter app folder and do a Firebase init to initialize your project for Firebase. The two we're going to use are Firestore and hosting. So we're actually going to be hosting this on Firebase, and we're going to be making use of the Firestore, which is a document-based database. You want to use an existing project, the one we created earlier, and select Twitter app. You want the default for the Firestore rules, same for this. And for the public directory, you want build, and no for the last two because you don't want a single page app and you don't want automatic builds. Next, we're going to build out our login page properly so we can actually log in using Google Authentication. We need to include a couple of libraries, the redirect, use auth state, which is a Firebase hook, and we just need to include a Twitter icon from our assets. We're also going to make use of props, so we need to add in a prop called Firebase. Here we need to actually do a let auth, then we need to use the Firebase auth method, then we're going to use the use auth state function with auth inside the parameters, giving us our user. If user is null, we're not logged in. If user has something, we're logged in. So if we're a user, we want to do a redirect straight to the home page because we're already logged in. Then we want to add in a class name of container and login, add in another div with a row, delete that login, and then we're going to add in a col3 and a col9. Col9 will have a non-breaking space for the moment, and inside of our col3 we're just going to include the Twitter icon which we imported from the assets. Add another row with an extra class login content, and inside of there we want to have a col12 div. Duplicate that a few times, add a h1 for the first one, log into Twitter, the second one a paragraph with whatever text you want, and a third one with a button, login. This login button is going to be the one that redirects us to Google. Create a constant, sign in with Google, and we're going to make this a function, so brackets into squiggly brackets, and inside of that we're going to have a constant provider is new Firebase auth, Google auth provider. This will give us Google as our main provider for signing in with. Then auth, which is our Firebase authentication, is to sign in with a pop-up using the provider that we've just made. Finally, we need to take that sign in with Google function we've just created and add it to an on-click for the button. And that is your login page done. Next, we're going to go ahead and initialize our Firebase application within our index.js. So we need to go ahead and import Firebase into our system. Then we need to require two different libraries, Firebase Auth and Firebase Firestore. These need to be done separately. You can't just include Firebase on its own, as it will throw up a bunch of warnings. Then you need to do a Firebase Initialize app, and then we need to go ahead and grab the JSON object from the Firebase website. Go to the gear, project settings, scroll down to the bottom and go to the config. Copy the JSON object and paste it back in the Initialize app. There you've initialized Firebase within your application. The last thing we need to do before we can actually log in is we just need to enable the authentication on Firebase itself. So on the Firebase website, go to Build Authentication. Hit Get Started, And here we have a selection of different authentication options. We're going to use Google because it's one of the easier ones we can use straight away. Enable it, and then just make sure you add in a project support email. Hit save, and then you're done. You should be able to log in now. Head over to your app and navigate to your login page. When you hit the login button, it'll open up a new tab where you can put in your real live Google username and password. The tab will close, and then you'll be back on your main application. You should just see the loading icon constantly. But the way that you know that it's actually logged in and worked is it's no longer on the login page up in the URL bar. It's just on the home page. That's because we haven't actually added anything to the home page yet. We're just showing the loading icon constantly. Now that's working, very quickly, I just want to build the logout page. So import the redirect library, then we're going to delete everything there and add in a constant auth equals Firebase auth method. Make sure that you're accessing the Firebase prop, and then you just need to do an auth sign out. And after we've done the sign out, we just need to return a redirect back to the login page. That means when we navigate to the logout page, it's just going to sign us out and send us back to the login page. Very simple. Next, we're going to create our compose section for our Twitter application. And we're going to start off in the constructor. And in the constructor, we want to add in this user equals null because by default, we want to have a null user. And then by default, we want to have this loading is true. So we're always loading when we first open up the compose section. Then we want to have this state with a value that is blank, meaning we have empty text for when we're going to enter our text later. Then we need to bind a couple of listeners to our methods that we're going to create. So this handle change and this handle submit. And this basically means that these two methods are going to be listening for changes that are going to happen within the actual application. Next, we're going to add in the components did mount method. And in there, we're going to be accessing the Firebase prop that we had. So this props Firebase. Then we want to access the auth method from the Firebase prop. And then from that, the auth state changed. So this auth state change is basically going to be listening for when the auth has changed from, say, not logged in to logged in. And then we're going to have the user object into a method. So inside of that little method, we're going to have this loading equals false. So now that we've actually loaded our user object, we know whether or not we're logged in or not. So loading now needs to be false. If we have a user, set it to the main user variable. So this user equals user. Then we need to do a force update. This will re-render the whole page. Quickly just add in the handle change method. We'll come back to that later. Next, underneath the render, we're going to add another method called view. And inside of that, we want to have a constant photo URL equals this user. That extracts out the actual photo URL for the user that is logged in, so we can display their nice little picture on the site. Then we want to return some HTML. So this is going to be the main bulk HTML that's actually going to display on the site. So have a div container, and very quickly, we forgot to add in the handle submit. So let's just quickly add that in. And then change the container class to compose. Then on your form, do an onSubmit equals this handle submit. That way, when we add the button in later to actually submit this form, the handle submit is where you will actually be able to deal with it and then submit it to Firebase. Add in another div with the class name compose header, and then add another div with the class name compose body. Inside of the compose body, we want to add another div, compose photo, and in there we want to actually add the image using the photo URL that we extracted out of the user. So put the source as the photo URL, class name rounded, just so then we actually have a rounded image, and give it a height of 50, with an alt, of course, to make it HTML standard correct. Then add another div with the class name compose message, and inside of that, add a text area with rows 5 and a placeholder, and put whatever you want in there. And then the value needs to be this state value, which is the blank value that we added up at the top in the constructor. And then the important one, on change equals this handle change. So every time the text changes, we're going to call that handle change event. Then up the top, import the redirect library. Then in the render, we want to check if we're not loading, then we're going to have an if this user with an else. If we do have a user, return the view, else return a redirect. Then if we navigate to the compose page in our browser, we can see that we have our lovely image with a what's happening text box. Then if we modify the URL and type in logout, that will log us out. Then if I try and force my way back into the compose page, it will automatically redirect us back to the login page. Back in the code, next on the handle change, we need to set the state with the updated value from the onChange event. So then every time we change the text on the text field, it'll change the value in the state. Then in our compose head, we want to add in a back button. So div compose back with an a tag href back to the home page and an image with the back icon. Give it a height 40 and an alt, and that gives us a nice back button. Add another div with col4 with a non-breaking space, and then another div with compose tweet as the class name. And in there, we want to have a button type submit with some text tweet. This button here will call the handle submit method. Next, in the handle submit, we want to do a very quick event prevent default. This stops any funky stuff happening when we hit the submit button. This is where we're actually going to be submitting the message to Google Firebase themselves. So this is where we're storing the information in the cloud. So after we've done the prevent default, we want to grab Firestore from the Firebase props. Then we want to have another constant message ref from the Firestore collections messages. Then after message ref, we want to do if this state value to string.length is greater than 0. What this does is it checks to see whether or not we actually have something in the text box. If we do, we want to grab from the user the UID, the display name, and photo URL. So we need to do a message ref add, and we want to add in the display name, then specify that the text is going to be this state value. The created at will be this props Firebase Firestore field value server timestamp. Then we want the UID, photo URL, and then finally we want to do set the state value back to blank. So we don't want to, we've submitted this message, so we want to clear it. Then if I go over to our application, type in a message and hit tweet. It looks like it hasn't done anything, but it actually has. Go over to your Firebase console on Google, give it a refresh, and have a look inside of your messages. And there we are, test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stored in our Cloud Firestore. Now we've finished the compose, we want to go on to the home component. A lot in the beginning of the home component is going to be the same as the compose, so we're just going to duplicate a few things across. Import the redirect up the top, build the constructor out the same way, copy in the component did mount, and the same for the render. The only major thing that's going to be different is the view. So in the view, we want to have a div container home with a row and 4 col12 divs. On the third div with col12, we want to add in a button tweet div. And inside of that, we want to have an a tag with a href to the compose section. Then we want to add in an image with a tweet icon with width 25 and alt button tweet. Up the top, we need to import the tweet icon from the assets library. Next, we need to create a new component called header.js. Then inside of the function header, make sure you add in user as the prop and grab the photo URL from the user. Return a div with row header and 3 cols, col2, col8, col2. In the first col2, we want an a tag with an image to the photo URL. In the second div, col8, we want to have a h1 with home. Then import a star icon from your assets library. In the third div, which is the col2, add in the image star icon and give it the class name button icon. Back in your home.js, you want to import the header that we've just created and then go down to the view and pop in our very first col12. Make sure you pass in the user prop, and in our last col12, we're going to create our footer component. And then right click and create a footer.js. And here we want to import a few icons from our assets library and return a div row footer with 4 col3 divs. And in your first col3, add in the image home icon. Go ahead and duplicate that for the rest of your divs and rename the images respectively. Then back in your home.js, similar to the header, we need to import the footer and pop it in our last col12. Next, we're going to build out our display section for the Twitter app, so when we write a tweet, we can actually see our tweet being displayed. So create a new component, tweet.js, and inside of tweet add the prop message, and then a constant from message with display name, text, photo URL, and created at. Then return a div with the class name tweet, with 2 more divs inside of that, and then a third div with the class name tweet image, and then an image with the source coming from the photo URL or
a URL to an image on the internet. Then another div with the class name tweet text with a paragraph pulling the text, and then a h6 with the display name or unknown. Then add a span in, and we're going to pull the created at object, which comes from Firebase, which has a method toDate and then another method toLocalDate string. And that's a special Firebase object for you. Now you're done with the tweets.js, we're going to create a tweets with the plural s.js with a constructor, a loading section within the render, and a separate view. Now this is going to be a class similar to how we've done other React components. Now inside of that view, we're going to return a div, and then we're going to grab from the state a messages object, which we'll create later, and the map from that messages object in the state. Inside of the tweet component, we want to have a key that grabs the ID from MSG. Then we want to pass in another prop message, which is MSG. Next, we're going to do a component did mount, and we're going to grab Firestore from the Firebase prop. Then create a messages array. And lastly, we just need to grab from the Firestore collection messages, we're going to order by the created at in a descending fashion at a limit of 25, get the records, then put all of that into a query snapshot. Then for each query snapshot, we're going to grab document that we're going to get from our messages collection. We're going to organize that into the messages array that we've created at the top, and we're going to extract out the doc ID and put it into the ID, the doc data.uid, put it into the UID, same for the display name, same for the photo URL, text, and created at. Finally, set the loading as false and update the state with the messages array that we've just created. Finally, we just want to catch any errors we get and dump it into the console log. You probably will need this, as this is a little bit fiddly, this code. Back in your home.js, import that tweets component you've just created and insert it into the cold well just below the header. Make sure you add in the Firebase prop. And that's it, you're done. Give it a refresh and you should see some tweets loading. If not, compose a tweet, hit the tweet button, go back and you'll see it load in. Awesome, you've just built Twitter in 20 minutes with Firebase and React. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and leave any comments on topics you want me to go over in future. With that being said, take it easy and I'll see you in the next video.